This is a video that I've been wanting to make for quite a long time now, because it involves the story of one of the best wrestlers in the world today. And of course, I'm talking about one Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega gained fame within the wrestling world for his time spent in New Japan Pro Wrestling, where many lauded him as the best wrestler in the world. He had a classic series of matches with Kazuchika Okada, which culminated with him winning the IWGP World Heavyweight Championship. And then all of a sudden, AEW becomes a thing, and he chooses to leave New Japan and sign with them. Kenny Omega would join AEW as the hottest free agent in all of professional wrestling. So many fans assumed that he'd be the one at the forefront of this new wrestling promotion, that he'd be the one leading the charge, that he'd be the ace of all elite wrestling, if you will. But that's not what happened. AEW chose to tell a different story, one that is arguably even better. They're telling a story where the payoff will be worth the long wait. This is Tranquilo Club, and this is the calculated arc of Kenny Omega in AEW. When Kenny Omega became a free agent in February 2019, any company that picked him up would have benefited greatly. As stated before, he had come off a hugely successful run in New Japan Pro Wrestling, and it was this run that helped him build a following amongst hardcore wrestling fans. But after the announcement of All Elite Wrestling, everybody felt it was inevitable that he'd sign with the promotion along with his friends. The recruitment of Kenny Omega by AEW would not take long, as it was announced in early February that he had signed with the promotion. This announcement came during an AEW press conference in Las Vegas for their upcoming show, Double or Nothing. Omega himself would show up at the press conference to huge fanfare. This was a huge deal, and it was because it was a huge get for AEW. It felt like when a sports team signs a big star player. The crowd's reaction said it all. Kenny Omega was destined to be their top guy. Now, Kenny Omega came into AEW as the best wrestler in the world. But it would also be announced that besides being just an on-screen talent, he would also be an executive vice president of the entire promotion, a title also held by his fellow stablemates the Young Bucks and Cody Rhodes, leaving many wondering how this would affect his role as an on-screen talent. But any concerns that people had were quickly undone when it was announced that Kenny Omega would be wrestling against Chris Jericho in the main event of the first ever AEW show, Double or Nothing. This would serve as a rematch from Wrestle Kingdom 12, where the two of these competitors met in a match where Kenny Omega ultimately came out victorious. But this time, this match would be on a different stage. It would be in AEW, the biggest alternative to WWE since WCW, meaning there would be way more eyes on this match than the first time around, and it would be the perfect platform for Kenny Omega to introduce himself to a much larger audience and prove why he was being lauded as the best wrestler in the world. And as if this match wasn't already huge enough, it would be announced that whoever came out victorious would be a participant in the match that would crown the first ever AEW World Champion. So the stakes for this match were insanely high, but these are the types of matches where Kenny Omega thrived in. He had gained a reputation in Japan to deliver when the pressure was on, so this was nothing new for Omega. If anything, this would be his crowning moment, his big moment in America, to prove why he earned the moniker the best bout machine. Becoming the ace of AEW was his destiny, and the fans knew it as well. So what happened? AEW decided to take a creative risk by subverting their audience's expectations. Let me explain. The Kenny Omega that went into Double or Nothing was a different Kenny Omega than the one from New Japan Pro Wrestling. The Kenny Omega that came into AEW had the weight of the world on his shoulders. The world already knew what he was capable of. He came in a made man, compared to New Japan Kenny, who we went on a whole journey with. We grew with him, we suffered with him, we saw him finally conquer the top of the mountain by seeing him become the World Heavyweight Champion. So now it was a matter of becoming the top guy in AEW. So, when Kenny Omega made his entrance into the MGM Grand Garden Arena for his match against Chris Jericho, the rabid AEW fanbase gave him a hero's welcome. It was almost like Kenny Omega had home field advantage. It felt like the perfect place and the perfect time, but it ended up being anything but. Kenny Omega would lose his AEW debut match against Chris Jericho. In the biggest moment of his career, he came up short. And it's not like Omega couldn't beat Jericho. He had already done that a year prior. Something was just missing that night. And while it was a huge loss in front of a large audience, maybe it was just a bad night for Omega. After the match, a debuting Jon Moxley would make his way to the ring and attack both Jericho and Kenny Omega. Once the show came to an end, it became abundantly clear that a matchup between Jon Moxley and Kenny Omega was coming. A big match, an ideal match for Kenny Omega to take to get back to winning ways. Before his big matchup with Jon Moxley at All Out 2019, Kenny Omega would pick up 2 wins in the lead up to the show. His first win came at Fyter Fest, where he teamed up with the Young Bucks to defeat the Lucha Bros and Laredo Kid. Next, he would pick up a win against Shima at Fight for the Fallen. So 2 wins against respectable opponents, but obviously none on the level of his super fight with Jon Moxley. But that match wouldn't end up happening at All Out. Moxley would end up pulling out of the match after an injury to his elbow that required surgery would leave him unable to compete. This left Omega without an opponent for All Out. But AEW found a last-minute replacement. They would announce that Pac would be making his AEW debut, replacing Jon Moxley to face Kenny Omega. This was a suitable replacement, as anybody who knows Pac knows he's one of the best wrestlers in the world. But with him stepping up with 9 days notice, Kenny Omega was still heavily favored to be the winner. But once again, Kenny Omega was beaten in his second big one-on-one match on pay-per-view for AEW, and the crowd was stunned. This loss was far more shocking than Kenny's first one back at Double or Nothing against Chris Jericho, because now we're left wondering what's going on with Kenny Omega. Why isn't he winning? He's supposed to be the ace of this company, and now we've seen him take 2 big losses on pay-per-view. It was no secret, this match was must win for Kenny Omega, to the point where even JR on commentary asked a question during Omega's entrance for this match. He asked, "Did Kenny Omega leave his wrestling heart in Japan?" And all things considered, it was a valid question. Was Kenny Omega losing because his heart was still in Japan? Or could it also be that the American stage was too big for him? Many questions were being asked after this loss to Pac, and it seemed to have gotten to Omega, as on being the elite, he was starting to act strange and almost unhinged. It got to the point where the Young Bucks got really worried about him and had to talk him in to showing up for the premiere episode of AEW Dynamite. And Kenny would end up showing up for this show, and he would participate in the main event where he teamed up with the Young Bucks to face Jericho and Santana and Ortiz. Kenny seemed to be in a better place mentally. He was on a roll in this match, that is, until Jon Moxley interfered and attacked him from behind. The two would brawl all over the arena, and it would end with the now iconic paradigm shift through the glass table to Omega. Later, it would be announced that Omega and Moxley would finally have their match at Full Gear in an unsanctioned match. And the pressure couldn't be bigger for Kenny Omega. This match was must win, even more than any other match he'd ever been in, because as stated before, this was a made Kenny Omega. This was no longer underdog Kenny Omega. And Omega himself would say this. He said he didn't want to lose to a guy like Jon Moxley, considering where he came from. Kenny was not holding back in the lead up to this match. He was making it known that he was more ready than ever, and that he'd be able to beat Moxley at his own game. This had the feel of a super fight, and it seemed as if Omega was finally ready to get his first big win in AEW. But for the 3rd consecutive time in a big match, Kenny Omega couldn't get the job done. Jon Moxley would defeat Kenny Omega at Full Gear, and it feels like this is the match that finally broke Kenny. Over the next few weeks, it appeared as if Omega was obsessing over the fact that he had lost to Moxley. He would talk about how he felt he could defeat Moxley if they were to have another match. And just as it seemed that Kenny Omega was reaching his breaking point, he found something that made him feel like a winner again. He found success teaming with his fellow Elite stable member Hangman Adam Page. The duo helped each other get back to winning ways almost instantly. It was almost too good to be true. But still, it wasn't clear whether Kenny was in this team for the long run or if he was just using it as a distraction. Omega and Hangman would exceed all expectations as a tag team, and they would even become tag team champions in this stacked tag team division. And this was all despite Hangman and Omega's complicated relationship, not just as a tag team, but as friends. These two were dominating a division while going through their own problems both internally and with each other. And the funny thing is, Kenny Omega started off as the one who was really invested in this tag team. He really wanted to make it work. But over time, he just grew tired with all his problems with Hangman Page. Meanwhile, Hangman was the opposite. He didn't want to be a part of this tag team in the beginning, but as time went on, he realized all the mistakes he was making, and at the end, the tag team was the only thing he had left and he wanted to make it work. But by the time Hangman realized this, it was already too late for Kenny Omega. He was too far gone at this point. When Hangman and Omega lost the tag team titles after hanging on to them for almost 8 months, that's when Omega realized that he was done with Hangman and that he didn't need him anymore. Which is why he left a defeated Hangman who was looking to him for support, just laying in the middle of the ring after they lost their titles. The story between these two is incredible, and if you want the full week-by-week breakdown, I have 2 videos and I'll leave the links to them in the description below. On the following episode of Dynamite, Kenny Omega would have a sit-down interview with Jim Ross, and he would say that he was done with tag team wrestling. He reassured that he enjoyed teaming with Hangman even though they sometimes didn't see eye to eye, but since they were no longer champions, that he wanted to move on and move into the singles division once again. And also, for the first time, Kenny would admit in the sit-down interview that he wanted to be the ace of AEW, and that he knew that this is what the fans wanted since the beginning. Omega would also admit that the primary reason he moved into the tag team division was because he was directionless after his loss to Jon Moxley. But after spending nearly a year in the tag team division, Omega was now ready to become the ace of All Elite Wrestling. And Omega would get his wish because it would be announced that he would be participating in a tournament that would determine the #1 contender for the AEW World Championship. And if you know Kenny Omega's history, you know he specializes in tournaments. There's a saying that goes, absence makes the heart grow fonder. The more you're kept apart from something, the more you'll miss it, the more you'll want to see it. And that's the route AEW decided to go when telling the story of Kenny Omega. Instead of instantly making Kenny the top guy in AEW, they made you wait for it. They made you want it, just like New Japan did. Only this time it's different. In New Japan, it was the chase to become the ace. In AEW, it's the chase to once again become the ace. By making the fans wait for Kenny to become the world champion, AEW added so many more layers to his character that wouldn't have been there had he just won the title right out the gate. This was a calculated move by Kenny Omega and all the higher-ups in AEW to give others a time to shine and make you want Kenny to be the top guy even more than you originally did. But they did it in a way that was clever. It's not like they just had him in the sidelines waiting to get his turn. They had him crafting one of the most interesting stories in wrestling in years with Hangman Page. And as a result, when Kenny finally does become the top guy, he'll have a white-hot feud with Hangman waiting for him. But before he gets there, Omega has one fight he has to get to first, and it's against the guy that beat him and sent his character into complete disarray, the man who started all of this, Jon Moxley. Omega versus Moxley is the big money match that everybody's waiting for, and this time it'll be for the title, and it'll be an Omega who's more serious than ever. One who's showing signs of the cleaner. It's a journey that's taken over a year to get to, but I feel like Omega becoming the champion is almost here. And when it finally happens, it'll be special and worth the wait. Because make no mistake about it, this calculated long-term storyline was the plan all along. Over a year ago, Kenny Omega warned us, he's just getting started.